to think that puberty blockers would stop sexual function, but it's something that the gender critical movement, the anti-trans movement, the transphobes made up.
Every single child or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm.
When I was looking for stuff about GRS, I messaged a bunch of people I knew and didn't know so well. And like more than one of them in their initial response sent me pictures of their genitals.
Why am I dancing with that trans person?
New study demolishes transphobic myth. Puberty blockers don't cause problems with sexual functioning in transgender adults, study finds. Yeah, for children, the changes of puberty can be undesirable. Like, you still have to go through puberty regardless though, right? Puberty blockers can temporarily halt these developments, give young people time to explore their gender identity. Overwhelmingly, it's not what happens. They go on to cross-sex hormones, proven to contribute to the mental well-being of transgender young people. The very biased article has not been proven. There have been studies that have shown some improvement. There have been other studies that show little to no improvement. All right, researchers from Amsterdam UMC presented 70 transgender athletes with questionnaires. All participants started with puberty blockers, then received gender-affirming hormones. The participants completed the questionnaire about sexual experiences, satisfaction, possible sexual problems on average 14 years after the start of their treatment. So 70 people, quite a small sample size. Our results showed that more than half of trans men and 40% of trans women are satisfied with their sex lives. This corresponds to the sexual satisfaction of the cisgender population. There was also no difference between people who started puberty blockers earlier or later in puberty. Most participants had no trouble with desire, arousal, or having an orgasm. Of the sexual problems mentioned, difficulty taking initiative was the most common problem among trans men. Reaching orgasm was the most frequently mentioned among trans women. Do not cause problems with sexual functioning in transgender adults. However, the most common problem with trans women was reaching orgasm, suggesting an issue with sexual function. 70 people is still a bigger sample size than 0 when it hadn't been tested before. Wow, thank you. I never would have guessed that. 70 is a bigger number than 0. I never would have guessed that had you not come along and told me. Still doesn't mean that it's a large sample size. Still doesn't mean that you can generalize this to a larger population. But thank you for pointing that out. I never would have guessed. However, most participants indicated these problems were only experienced as stressful to a limited extent. So we're kind of talking more about how satisfied they are, regardless of whether they might have problems, which isn't really the same thing. The frequency of sexual problems was consistent with previous studies among transgender adults who did not start hormone therapy until adulthood. So the best you might be able to say is, well, it didn't make it worse. Provide important insight for healthcare providers. The guidance of transgender youth can reduce concern about sexual functioning later in life. Well then, what's the point in you saying, it's a small sample size? I never could have guessed that either, lol. Pointless. Because the study has a small sample size. What that means is that the results are not necessarily very generalizable to a larger group of people, meaning that what this study is telling us is actually quite limited. Hope that helps, Raylin. Hope you're good. Van der Meulen emphasizes, with these results we can better inform young people starting puberty blockers about what they can expect sexually later in life. Well, to a small extent. At the same time, researchers underline sexual experiences are complex, influenced by both physical and psychosocial factors. That's the other thing. It is to an extent either way going to be hard to tell whether puberty blockers are affecting sex function, etc. Because it is based on a lot of different factors. That kind of goes both ways. That kind of goes if you're saying that it causes problems. It goes if you're saying that it doesn't cause problems. It doesn't until there are bigger studies that contradict it. You take the result of the best study we have available as it stands. Well, that really depends on a lot of stuff. Like, if it's not very generalizable, if the results aren't very meaningful, you don't just take it and say, well, this is what it is. It's just evidence, right? Here's some evidence to the contrary. This is Marcy Bowers we're about to hear from. Here's some evidence to the contrary.
The second was an observation that I had that every single child or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero. These are just assigned male at birth, so trans feminine, and it's because they never in their lives are exposed to testosterone. That doesn't change. So blockers prevent the rise of testosterone, and they don't really go on testosterone at or around surgery or into adulthood. And so we don't know. They're going to have this sensation. There's no question about that. But are they going to be able to achieve sexual satisfaction? It's important in relationships.
You see that Richard Dawkins talked about Monty on his latest vid. I did not. I'll have to have a look. Thank you. Hope you Good Grief Foundation.
And I know that from
More people need to watch Katy Montgomerie. More people need to talk about Katy Montgomerie because something is extremely wrong here. And people like that are not helping other trans people. They're lying to them, filling their heads with shit. Listen, I am, to an extent, poisoning the well, but we're familiar at this point. I ended up not watching it for a long time because I just couldn't be asked anymore. Everything I watch is just so poorly thought out, so poorly researched, so clearly heavily biased.
I work with female genital mutilation survivors that the lack of being able to be intimate with a partner is very important. And so this is what really raised the red flag for me, is to say, look, we need to have our eyes open about it. I think it's been beneficial talking about it. I know Joe and many others have
Joanna Olson Kennedy did a study around this supposed proven improvement in the well-being of these transgender people. It found almost nothing. She was forced to conclude, well, it either helps or it doesn't not help. You know what I mean? She sat on this data. She sat on this study because she didn't want it to be used politically, because she knew that the results that she got were not very good.
Reported to me, they've changed their approach a little bit in their informed consent models, and that we're talking about masturbation now. We're talking about, okay, that's an area of the body that's got very dysphoric for you, but you know what? It's all a penis is just a large clitoris. I mean,
all a penis is just a large clitoris. Anyway, let's see what Monty says. We looked at the study, or the article she's reading. I don't think we even look at the study ourselves. Nope, we just take the article as gospel. This article seems biased in my opinion. Some of the stuff that they cite is very suspect. Some claims are made that are very suspect. We already know about this giving young people time to explore things. It's not really how it pans out. Let's see.
There's been a new study which finds puberty blockers do not cause problems with sexual functioning in trans adults. Study finds.
It didn't find this. We looked at this article. It didn't find that they don't cause any problems. It found that plenty of these people still have problems. There's a suggestion that maybe puberty blockers aren't what caused the problems. But to be clear, we don't really know. Like I said, it's a small sample size. It's covering a fairly broad topic of like sexual satisfaction, etc. It's really not finding as much as what we're going to claim, I'm guessing. Who are these people? WPATH. There's Marcy Bowers. She was the head of WPATH.
So what they mean here is trans people who take puberty blockers as kids and then medically transition don't have problems with sexual function. And if you're not...
Yeah, that is definitely not what it found. We've already read it.
Some hyper-online weirdo, or you're not gender critical, or you're not transphobe, you might be like, why would anyone think they did? And that's the correct response, because...
Yeah, it's the correct response after hearing.
The second is, or adolescent who is truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero.
Yeah, why would people think that they did cause any problems? Having heard something like that, maybe.
There's never actually been evidence to suggest that they do. No one has any reason.
Except for what we just watched, coming from the mouth of Marcy Bowers. WPATH. Have you heard of WPATH, Katy?
To think that puberty blockers would stop sexual function. But it's something that the gender critical movement, the anti-trans movement, the transphobes made up. It's one of their little things where they pretend to be concerned about trans people's healths and bodies and futures and stuff, but actually they're just like...
Yes, gender critical people made it up. Gender criticals such as Marcy Bowers. Sorry, what did she say again?
Every single child or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero.
Yeah, this is something Gender Critical's made up that Marcy Bowers just happened to have said a few years ago. Okay, sure.
And they're just trying to make up excuses. So there's been this like argument used in justifying bans of trans people's healthcare, particularly puberty blockers, saying, oh, but if you give puberty blockers to trans kids, then when adults, they won't be able to have sex, they can't orgasm, they can't ever have a sex life and stuff. That was never based on anything. It was just something one of them said, and then
That was never based on it. It's something one of them said.
Started repeating to each other, but it's just false. We've actually had a study on it now. They've never had a...
Yeah, a study which still finds that a bunch of trans women were having trouble orgasming, which is kind of what we just heard here.
Study at all showing the other, their claim, by the way. Anyway, researchers from Amsterdam presented 70 trans adults with questionnaires, and you might be like, what? Only 70? This doesn't count as a real study. How can we possibly count with only 70 people? The alternate claim, the thing this is debunking, has zero evidence. It has 0 studies with 0 participants.
Yes, zero evidence. Zero evidence for the contrary.
Blocked Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero.
No evidence.
So, this is much better than what you have. So why do you believe a claim of 0 evidence, and then you're suddenly pretending that this isn't enough evidence to believe the default position?
Has she actually looked for any evidence of people saying this? My guess is not.
Default position is that your nonsense claim of no evidence is false. There's no reason to think trans people that have worse sexual function or however they describe it.
Yes, no reason at all to think that they have worse sexual function.
Was an observation that I had that every single child or adolescent who was truly blocked Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean,
completely no evidence whatsoever. To be fair, Marcy Bowers just made a statement, yes, of what she observed treating trans children. We don't know what sample size she's referring to, and it's nothing she's published yet. That's just a conference. There's still evidence. If I play it more times, will you understand that she's saying they transitioned a bunch of kids at a certain time and they weren't experiencing orgasm? And to an extent, there's still evidence of that same thing, albeit it's unclear whether the puberty blockers in these cases are causing it. But this is something that Marcy Bowers found. Yeah, there's no sample size. It's not a study. Studies are not the only way that you get evidence.
Anyway,
if you want to call in, Raylan, you're more than welcome to, by the way.
Participants started with puberty blockers, then received...
I'll link my Discord at the bottom. It's much easier than someone occasionally popping their head up in chat. You're not denying it what she said, but what I'm saying is it should be published properly. What if she just chooses to never publish it? If Marcy Bowers makes this admission but never publishes it in anything, does that mean we just shouldn't believe that it happened? She might just choose not to use this for anything, publish any data on this. Then what?
Received gender-affirming hormones, received trans healthcare, or received HRT. The participants completed the questionnaire about experiences, satisfaction, and possible sexual problems on an average of 14 years after the start of the treatment. So
yeah, and of course, bear in mind, it's not like it was measured in any meaningful way. They were just asked about it. Maybe they're all being honest. Maybe some of them, maybe none of them, we don't know. All I'm saying is limitations. There's some evidence that maybe puberty blockers doesn't always cause a problem. Absolutely not, but I think she's doing a disservice to kids' health, not publicizing good healthcare studies. Well, yeah, I'd agree with that. But ultimately, there's a bias here. Like, Joanna Olson-Kennedy did a study of transgender children, finding very little improvement in their mental health in general. And she sat on it for like a good while. Like, fearing how it would be used politically. You can look this up. It's been published now. And you can see there's really not much of a result. They're saying, well, they don't seem like they don't help, you know. Like, why would Marcy Bowers publish, like, stuff on this? There's a conference call. They probably didn't realize this would ever get out. They can just hide whatever they want because they're W-Path. They run this shit. Like, there's probably all sorts of shit that's being hidden from us, quite honestly.
this is a real long-term study, or pretty long-term. Now, this bit's kind of, at first, I don't know if funny isn't the word. Humans are just a bit of a disaster. But it says the researcher explains, our results show that more than half of trans men and 40% of trans women are satisfied with their sex lives. That sounds quite low.
Wait, can I check something? When it says more than half of trans men, 40% of trans women are satisfied with their sex life, this corresponds to the cisgender population. Do they mean that 40% of women and more than half of men, or the other way round? Facts and truth should, in theory, eventually win out despite politics. Well, yeah, true. The problem is, this is a very politicized issue. So I don't think we're ever going to get all that much in the way of facts and truth. And a lot of these studies are just not very good and don't justify the kind of shit that we're doing to children. I'm very, very anti-transitioning children myself. I don't think it's a good idea. Even if sexual function might be okay, you still got people whose genitals don't grow properly. They don't tend to do the penile inversion method when doing bottom surgery on someone who's had puberty blockers, because their genitals didn't grow properly. So even if it still all functions and stuff, that is still a potential thing that they have to deal with, and that might impact their sex life.
Less than half of trans women and a bit more than half of trans men are happy with their sex lives. You're like, oh, this is it. Evidence.
Yeah, like more than half of, 35 presumable trans men, 35 trans women.
That trans people, it shouldn't be allowed to transition because having good sex is more important than every other aspect of your life. Like
Why are we trying to head off these arguments that no one's making?
Even if this nonsense claim from gender criticals was true, it wouldn't justify stopping transition. They constantly say trans people only transition for sex, and then when you go, well, that's not true. Why would anyone upend their entire life just for sex? They then say you shouldn't be able to
Why would anyone upend their entire life just for sex? Have you ever watched To Catch a Predator? There's a bunch of people right there. People do that all the time. What are you talking about? How often do men get in fucking affairs, cheat on their wives and shit like that, and vice versa? Get people that see prostitutes, and whatever consequences come of that. That happens all the time, my friend.
transition because you won't have good sex. Like, nothing they say makes any sense. Anyway, pretty low. That is less than half trans women and more than half trans men are happy with their sex lives. However,
that isn't great odds. In fairness, if that corresponds in some way to the overall population, then it suggests there's more factors than just being trans. And the other thing is, these people might have reduced sexual function, but be okay with it. In which case, well, what are we saying? It still might reduce sexual function. It still might cause problems for people. They just might, because of the rest of, they're happy with their transition in general. They might sort of take the long and short of that, and they might be okay with that. So I just don't think this study is saying very much, ultimately.
corresponds to the sexual satisfaction of the cisgender population. There was also no difference between people who started puberty blockers early or later in puberty. So actually, those numbers are just true for men and women in general, which sounds about right to me. I wouldn't be surprised if half
You're just trusting this, but okay.
the people on Earth weren't happy with their sex lives. What is important here, it doesn't really matter if these numbers are a bit...
Yes, lots of people aren't happy with their sex life, but no one upends their life over sex. Okay.
desperate. What matters is that they're the same as cis people, and therefore the nonsense anti-trans claim that puberty blockers ruin your sex life to the point where it justifies...
Ruin your sex life, such as if you couldn't orgasm?
The second was an observation that I had. Every single child or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm.
Might that ruin your sex life?
Taking healthcare away from you and ruining your life isn't justified. Complete nonsense.
Yeah, apart from the kids that might well just desist, such as other studies which suggest you leave these kids alone and don't block their puberty, they might well just desist from this. Not all of them. The problem then is, well, maybe you could have helped some of these people sooner, but A, there's only so much we know about the long-term effects on people's health of blocking their puberty, because you don't go through the other puberty. That isn't possible. And also, more importantly, we can't screen the kids that are gonna persist from the kids that aren't necessarily, if they weren't to go through the treatment. And if they do go through the treatment, they almost definitely will persist, because we're loading on the confirmation bias.
Complete nonsense. Most participants had no trouble with desire, arousal, or having an orgasm. Of the sexual problems that were mentioned, difficulty taking the initiative was the most common problem against trans men, while reaching orgasm was most frequent amongst trans women. Sounds like cis men and women. However, most...
I don't know, it's just very strange. These male people are struggling now to reach orgasm. Okay, so they have then lost some sexual function, necessarily, because they didn't used to have that problem, presumably, because they're male.
Participants indicate these problems were only experienced as stressful to a limited extent. The frequency of sexual problems was consistent with previous studies among trans adults who did not start hormone therapy until adulthood. So when you transition doesn't really seem to make any difference, and whether you're trans or cis doesn't seem to make any difference, conclusively.
Well, based on one study of 70 people, where there's other evidence out there to suggest that other people have had problems.
Debunked. This claim is completely nonsense. Why would transition make your sex?
That does not debunk anything. This person doesn't know how to use studies, how to read studies, what studies actually mean. Most of the time it is evidence for or against something. In the case of trans healthcare, if you're not going to say that the evidence is mixed at best, then you are dishonest.
Sex life worse. These results provide important insights for healthcare providers and the guidance of trans youth and can reduce concerns about sexual function in later life. Yes, true, in the sense that we need a study to say the moon is real so that the scientific method has formally concluded that the moon is real, but we already all knew the moon was real. If, like, one of the, what I think
This isn't analogous.
is so ridiculous about this claim that transition...
Don't forget, this person thinks they have literally changed sex and are now female.
Make sure, like, or early transition or puberty blockers or something ruins your sex life is there are loads of things that the trans community as a group knows and information is passed down and you learn about. And there are loads of things like when you're going for laser hair removal, how you should never pay full price for it because there's always vouchers, and how you shouldn't do it after you've just had a suntan because it can cause darkening on your face, which isn't something you want. And there's a whole host of things with every single treatment procedure. Like when you're having GRS, everyone knows that there's a chance you might not ever be able to orgasm again. Like there's a very low chance, but it's not important.
Oh my God.
Possible. Obviously, there's a chance you could die on the operating table. There's a chance that you won't be satisfied with the results or whatever. And those things you get told by other trans people. You know about them, you absorb them for your transition, and it's like community knowledge, stuff that we've...
I'm curious what your definition of female is then. What singular thing points to someone definitively being female? Sex is your reproductive role. One person creates the large gamete, the other person creates the small gamete. One impregnates, the other is the impregnatee. And the way you develop is either around one or the other of those sexual roles. Something might go wrong. You might end up infertile. You'll still have the parts required to make that, and there's something wrong with you. Like, an infertile woman generally still has ovaries. Even women with various kinds of DSDs have ovaries, but like sometimes like street gonads, things like that. They don't develop properly. Like people with Turner syndrome, for example. It's your reproductive role. Sex has to be based on reproduction because that's why it exists. That's why we evolved that function. And sexual dimorphism is because we need to reproduce. That's our method of doing so. It's the same with any other animal you can look at. Animals which can't change sex either. We can't change sex. You can look at a clownfish that has that function for changing sex. Do you know why they have that function? It's because they need to reproduce. And sometimes they'll have too many of one or the other. That's why that is there. So it's still all about reproduction. We don't have that function to change sex. So you're one or the other. And if you can't produce gametes, you still have gonads. You still have genetics, even if DSDs exist. Sometimes it's a bit more complicated. It's your sexual role, ultimately, your reproductive role. Katy Montgomerie was born with a penis. Katy Montgomerie is a male. Chopping your penis off does not change your sex. If that is the case, anytime a man has to get his penis amputated, he's now a woman. Having breasts doesn't make you female. If that's the case, then fat men are female. If having facial hair makes you a male, then women with PCOS are male. It's your reproductive role.
Known probably for longer than scientists have ever acknowledged that trans people exist. You don't hear this claim that puberty blockers ruin your sex life from trans people. Absolutely not.
How many people are you hearing from in general that have been through puberty blockers? Do all those people even want to like engage with this kind of shit? Like with the community online? The online trans community is not all trans people. Like part of the whole point that males will like take puberty blockers is to avoid things like facial hair growing, your voice dropping, very clear signifiers that you're in fact a male. Are they really gonna then, they wanna like fit in with society in that way? They're gonna then start hanging out with all these fucking radicals and stuff? Like plenty of these people are just not your people. You like to think that you speak for trans people, but you actually don't. You speak for a small fraction of trans people.
Oh, you only ever hear it.
You recently said the fact he was born male is due to a developmental anomaly. He's insane. Yeah, that is insane. He's male. He's a man. Same as me. I had surgery. I took hormones. I'm still male. I've not taken on the other reproductive role. It is impossible to do that as a male.
From transphobes who also happen to want to ban kids from transitioning full stop, and also who happen to want to ban trans people from public spaces, and also happen to want to ban...
Who wants to ban trans people from public spaces? I hear that you were saying that we might at one time need to reproduce, maybe long ago. We still need to reproduce, you fucking retard. What are you talking about? We don't need to reproduce anymore? Is that what you're saying? Are you like fucking nuts? How do people reproduce? What would happen if everyone stopped reproducing? What would happen if we lost the ability to reproduce? We would die out. We would be gone. That is still extremely important. In fact, it's very important right now in Western countries where our birth rates are down through the fucking floor. And now we're looking at like aging populations where more people are leaving the workforce than joining it. So there's more money not going into the fucking government and more money coming out of it to pay for all these old people. So like, at the moment, it's extremely important. In the average human, there is no primal need for any of us need to reproduce. That is our will, our want. You're not understanding what I'm saying. In order for humans to continue, there needs to be reproduction. That is why the sexes exist, for reproductive purposes. Reproduction is paramount to the species continuing. It doesn't matter whether it's our will or whether it's something we are driven to do. Of course we're driven to do it. Are you a male? Have you got a penis? Why the fuck do you think you get erections? What the fuck do you think it is that comes out when you jerk off? What do you think happens when you have a period?
Kids from transitioning full stop, but also who happen to want to ban trans people from public spaces, and also happen to want to ban everything to do with trans people and want to create a world without trans people in it. I just wish people would...
This is nonsense, by the way. No one really thinks that. Maybe a handful of people. Those people are extremists.
Like, look and see where these concerns are coming from. Like, there's loads of things. Trans people are constantly demanding to have better healthcare. The way that some doctors treat us is terrible, like denying us access to some medications all the time.
Yeah, what this person wants is like patient-led care. What this person wants is, I want this, give it to me.
And things that we, like, another classic is in the UK, they won't prescribe you progesterone, but progesterone can benefit your mental and physical health. And in other countries, they prescribe it like by default because it's part of transition. And that's like a thing that the community learns, and you learn that if it's something you can get on, then perhaps you should try it, and it's a good idea too. And I personally take progesterone. And that's what you hear from trans people. Like, we're constantly saying healthcare should be better. Here's the risks of this. What about this?
You define sex in medicine, law, and society in terms of function, not just gametes. Yes, function, as in, do you impregnate or get impregnated? You can tie it all back to that.
You've got to consider this. So if there was any real issue here, you would have heard it from trans people, for sure. Like, no one would ever recommend something which has some... Like, the gender criticals and anti-trans people always act as if there's like some cover-up by trans people to hide the negative...
The outcome should be you can decide your own sex. You can think up what your sex is in your head, and that's what it is. And you're a bigot if you disagree. And we shouldn't worry about why we have these things and why we are how we are. That's irrelevant. We're just a cluster of properties. And if you get rid of enough of those properties...
about transition. And then they also run these like hate forums where they go on to places where trans people talk about difficulties they're having in surgery or something, and they post them on these hate forums and laugh about them, obviously showing that there's no kind of cover up about any of this stuff. I think if anything, most trans people I know are the most TMI people on earth. And like, when I was looking for stuff about GRS, I messaged a bunch of people I knew and didn't know so well. I was like, oh, you know, I've heard...
Yes, in private, yeah.
But you've had GRS, could you tell me about it? And like, more than one of them, in the initial response, sent me pictures of their genitals. Like, pal, here you go, this is what it looks like, this is what you can expect. I was like,
Sent you Jesus Christ, you're not doing the fucking trans community any favors when you talk about stuff like this. You know that, right? Like, I tell you one thing, if any trans people ever reached out to me about surgery, I'm not sending them pictures. That's nasty.
It's like, whoa, okay, didn't necessarily ask for that. But yeah, trans people are going to tell you about every aspect of their transition if you ask them in good faith. So it's just completely bullshit. This whole study, I mean, it wasn't a waste of time. Thank you for doing it to the people involved. Progressing the knowledge about trans people's healthcare is always good. But this is a study finds out the water is wet in 2025 kind of thing that we just, if it weren't for the anti-trans movement, we wouldn't have this study because we wouldn't need to debunk the bullshit they make up. And this won't be the last thing like this. There are so many things, most things, if you're someone who's not a trans person, you stumbled across this video, most of the things you've been told about trans healthcare are just totally made up. And it's all like this. It's all like, oh, they made up some things to scare people out of transitioning, and then it turns out it's bullshit. It actually makes people's lives better. Every single time.
There we go. Sorry, I just want to play this one more.
The second was an observation that I had. Every single child who was, or adolescent who was truly blocked at Tanner stage 2 has never experienced orgasm. I mean, it's really about zero. These are just assigned male at birth, so trans feminine. And it's because they never in their lives are exposed to testosterone. That doesn't change. So blockers prevent the rise of testosterone, and they don't really go on testosterone at or around surgery or into adulthood. And so we don't know. They're going to have the sensation. There's no question about that. But are they going to be able to achieve sexual satisfaction? It's important in relationships. And I know that from my work with female genital mutilation survivors, that the lack of being able to be intimate with a partner is very important. And so this is what really raised the red flag.
I'm trying to say I think sex is socially constructed, but not in a well-worded way. The argument is bunk anyway, but sex is biologically determined. Yeah. The way we categorize sex is socially constructed because it's our categorization of something. But what we are categorizing is people's reproductive roles.